Hello, BookTube, and welcome to March Mystery Madness, a great, epic, venerable BookTube event celebrating murder mysteries in all their infinite variety. March Mystery Madness is 9 years old this year, so one of our prompts is the ninth book in a series. If you want prompts for this, you only have to read a mystery. Just read a mystery in March, and your power is blazing in March Mystery Madness. But if you want some prompts, one of ours is read the ninth book in a series. I've decided to take that prompt and run with it, as the kids say. So I'm reading the ninth book in every murder mystery series ever written. It's a huge amount of number nines. And I'm bouncing all around because I've been enthusiastically reading murder mysteries my whole reading life. I love them. Cannot do without them. And I follow series, of course, as any mystery reader does. I follow series. So a lot of these things are familiar to me. Last night I decided to spin the wheel and pick a book that was not familiar to me at all. I've never held a copy in print form. I've never read any books in the series. Didn't start with number 1. I started with number 9. And it's this. It's a Reed Bennett mystery. It's Snowjob by Ted Wood. I want to start right away by strenuously urging a moratorium on the title Snowjob. 1 word or 2 words. I strenuously urge that no one ever call a book that again. Not a moratorium, really a ban. Just never do it again. As is always the case with a book with a bad title, a good title suggested itself in 10 pages of reading. But this is the story of Reed Bennett and his friend Sam. Reed is the chief of police in a small town called Murphy's Harbor in Canada. And as he says over and over again in this book, his title is a misnomer because he's the only person on the staff. It's just one person. It's just an anachronism. It comes with the job, the title of chief of police, even though he doesn't have a staff. He just has Sam, who is an enormous German Shepherd, an enormous and well-trained German Shepherd. And I guess he's had a whole bunch of adventures, but I'm only reading this book. And in this book, he is in a small town called Chambers, Vermont. He has crossed the border. As he puts it in this book, he's a few hard driving hours in that direction. He has crossed the border into the United States and is in Chambers, Vermont for a very important reason, a very personal reason. An old Vietnam buddy of his. No time in this book is explicitly listed, but for instance, one of the characters' teenage girls has New Kids on the Block posters on her wall. There's nothing like the internet or computers. And also, Vietnam vets are not ancient. They're not the extremely frail elderly. So I'm assuming that this takes place in the 80s. I don't think there was ever an explicit mention of that. But Reed Bennett is in Chambers, Vermont because of Doug Ford. Doug Ford is an old Vietnam buddy of his who demobbed when he did, went into civilian life. Neither one of them are Rambo characters. They're not, Ted Wood is not going for the crazy vet thing at all. In fact, just the opposite. Doug Ford has become a cop in Chambers, Vermont. The only black cop in town. He and his wife Melody and their children are the only black people in town. That element is handled surprisingly well here. Reed Bennett has to confront that fact a few times with the inhabitants of Chambers, Vermont, and says, I think accurately, that no, having a black family in town just surprises people. They're not all bigots. They're just surprised. When they get used to you, they won't even remember it. I have spent time in Vermont. I feel certain that is the case. So this is also not that. That could also be very easy. In addition to Reed Bennett having an old Nam friend who blows a gasket, this could also have been an easy thing about just simple small town racism. It isn't either one of those things. Instead, Doug Ford has been arrested for the murder of a young woman named Cindy Laver. The barmaids in this ski resort town say that they saw them together all the time. It was clear they were having a clandestine affair. Doug's wife, Melody, is described by all the people in the book, even the people who end up being the bad guys. Everyone says she's utterly remarkable. Just an incredible woman. She's portrayed really well. And yet, despite the fact that Doug Ford is therefore the luckiest man on earth, everyone has been watching him have this affair with Cindy Laver. And she ends up dead. She has been brutally murdered, strangled with one of her own pantyhose, as we're told over and over and over again. And all the evidence points to Doug Ford. The money that she was taking from her job to its safe deposit box was on the front seat of his car. His fingerprint was found on a beer can in her apartment. So his own colleagues in the Chambers police force arrest him. He makes a call to Reed Bennett for help. And Reed, of course, comes with Sam to look into it. And it doesn't look good. The cops strike Reed Bennett. He, of course, deals with them. And the cops in the town strike him as fundamentally kind of honest. He doesn't think they're railroading his friend at all. He thinks they're being fairly straight with him. The more he digs, the more he gets the sense that this just doesn't feel right at all. He knows Doug Ford. He knows Doug is innocent. Absolutely sure of it. He meets with Doug briefly in prison, and Doug tells him, the flirting that I was doing with Cindy Laver was an act. It was to throw people off the scent. I was actually helping her with something, with a case involving the mob. The suspicion arises early. This is like the second or third chapter. The suspicion arises that the mob might be interested in Chambers, Vermont. At one point, I think it's halfway through the book before a character says, well, that never seemed likely on the surface because nothing here makes enough money to interest the mob. I don't know how much Ted Wood knows about the Vermont ski industry, especially when it used to snow. It was more there. First of all, there is no business that makes too little money for the mob to get involved. And if you have a picturesque ski resort in Vermont during busy snow seasons, you're with restaurants in town, you're easily making enough money to attract the mob. I'm not smiling because the mob is involved. I'm smiling because Ted Wood, I think, has more limitations as a writer than he thinks he does. Because I forget where it was, like chapter 6 or 7, something like that, when we start to get a few more details about the specific New York mob family that has sent one of theirs into this town and who's maybe nosing around about getting involved in some sort of business with a couple of those business owners or a couple of the bigwigs in town. And I don't remember his name, Manfredi or something like that, or the name of the crime family, Nucci or Gnuzzi or something like that. And I remember I was a dozen chapters in here and I was thinking, geez, why isn't that name sticking in your mind? And then I realized why the name wasn't sticking in my mind. Because the Italian characters in this family are from that ancient Sicilian mob group known as the Red Herrings. I don't know why I didn't see it earlier. Utterly ridiculous. There's one poor mobster in here who he is found dead several times. No one can identify him. He seems to end up in every closet, every back trunk of a car. He keeps being found dead. I felt sorry for him, and what kind of wanted to know his story, especially since he was being knocked around like a spare hockey puck. I never for a minute believed that this story was going to boil down to the mob. I never for a minute believed that. But Reed Bennett, the more he looks into this story, the more he realizes, well, okay, you're saying that Doug Ford robbed and killed this woman. But aside from his fingerprint on a beer can, just one fingerprint on just one beer can in her apartment, there are no fingerprints anywhere else, including her own. The whole place looks like it was professionally cleaned. Where did he get that equipment and where did he put it when he was done with it? And also, the money was on the front seat of his car just sitting there? In between the two front seats of the car just sitting there, no attempt to even hide it? You're saying that a seasoned police officer would do this kind of a job? It looks like a setup. It looks obviously like someone set him up. Eventually, Reed Bennett manages to make the powers that be in Chambers, Vermont accede to that and gets Doug out and about in order to pursue this thing. And I was reading this book, and I was initially buoyed up by a couple of things. One, the Vietnam vet angle is not worked at all. Two, just automatically assuming that small town Vermont, or actually small town anywhere outside of the Deep South, is just reflexively too a man bigoted. Neither one of those things happened, and that gave me the hint that maybe this would be an unusual book. And there are some good turns of phrase. Some of the scenes here are really well done. I wanted to strangle Reed Bennett by the time, for the 100th time, he referred to himself and others as coppers. I wanted to strangle him. He kept saying that so often. But just when I would think that I could skate right through a scene, Ted Wood would make it a little more interesting than I was expecting. The problem here, it's never more than a little more interesting. There's no part of this book that if you're a seasoned mystery reader, there's no part of this book you won't be able to accurately guess. The opening scene is Reed Bennett in a bar in one of the taverns in town, in Chambers, Vermont. Big rowdy crowd, lots of skiers. He makes nice with the barmaid. She goes off to wait on other guys at their table. One of them feels up her butt and won't take no for an answer. Our hero has to peel himself off from the bar and set the guy straight with a like a nerve punch to his arm that makes his arm drop down. I read that and I thought, oh, okay, so the overprivileged, overmoneyed young guy who's a loudmouth in the bar, we've all seen that scene, happens a million times. Our hero diffused the situation, the guys glower and leave, and never like this place anyway. How many times have you read that line? When I read that, I knew for a certainty, I may even have said it out loud to my sleeping being, they're going to meet him outside. And they did. And they did. The only reason that it wasn't a Jack Reacher style scene is because while they're all crowded around Reed Bennett, he calls for Sam, who's been sleeping in the bed of his truck the whole time and is easily able to just jump over and come to him. And none of these guys want to face that. None of them want to face the equivalent of an atom bomb. They don't want to get bitten, as they say. Right on cue, we're hearing dogs bark. Isn't that interesting? It's just attention, right? Not anything I need to get involved in. Huh? It sounds like just lots and lots of shouting. They wouldn't be doing it if my bee were there. They don't do that. They don't sound off when she's there. But anyway, I knew that scene was coming. And I didn't know anything about this series, or I would have at that moment predicted that someone in town, probably one of those guys, those young guys, was going to kill Sam at the course of the book. I didn't know when I read this book that in the previous 8 books, Sam is a character the whole time, so the author obviously isn't going to kill him just as a plot device. I got a little bit sick of that when it happens to dogs. Instead, Reed Bennett just starts investigating. And one of the tactics that he uses is a cop tactic. It's never commented on directly in the book, as far as I could tell. I don't think Ted Wood ever draws your conscious attention to it. And certainly Reed Bennett never draws the conscious attention of it to other people. But one of the cop tactics that he does in the early chapters of this book is to get everybody to repeat the crime to him. The cop who showed up at the scene, Doug Ford himself. Doug Ford's wife, to the limited extent that she's been told anything about it. The chief of police in Chambers. The cops in Chambers who took Doug Ford into custody. He gets everybody to repeat the crime. And that's an old cop tactic. That is to show whether or not there will be interesting leads that will develop from discrepancies. And if you're an active reader, if you're paying attention, if you've read cop drama cop drama novels, I just read one by Ed McBain, you're expecting it. And maybe you've gotten pretty good at sensing some of those dissimilarities yourself. You get a sense right away of who in town might not have liked Doug Ford and for what reasons. And all of it is predictable. When you see that rich kid mouthing off and then getting a beat down in a bar at the very beginning of the book, you know one of two things for sure if you're dealing with an author who's okay being a little derivative. Either that kid is going to end up dead, or that kid is going to end up very important to the plot. And one of those two things happened. Everything that I expected happened here, except for the wandering corpse of the dead red herring. But other than that, and that wasn't done for laughs. I'm sure that wasn't. There's nothing humorous in this book. Nothing self-aware either. It almost seems, I don't know anything about Ted Wood, but it almost seems like he set out to say, well, I want to write a police procedural. I don't want it to stand out. I just want it to scratch that itch. And I don't really have that itch when it comes to police procedurals. I find them interesting. I was never tempted to stop reading this thing, but I don't have that itch. Police procedural is really going to have to stand out to me. I've read a couple of crime novels that were police procedurals that were incredibly good. Not here. Not here. So we've got a little bit of a dud for March Mystery Madness, a little bit of a misfire. I didn't dislike it at all, but I think I'm ready tonight to move on to very familiar territory. I think I might do that for tonight. Reread something that I know quite well. If I do, either way, I will report back in my next installment. Thank you, BookTube.